What do I don't even know what I'm talking about to this, for this, where this new meeting. Boom. Wow. Start. Copy. Link. Boom. 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 Was your first Invisalign day painful too? I'm struggling. Oh, you'll get over it. But like days like 1 through 3, yeah, I think are really bad. But you'll get there. You'll get there, Chief. Why so early? 'Cause I'm talking to my good friend Yaron, but I call him Yaron, if you know what I mean. Because I sure as don't know what I mean. Don't worry, he's coming. Gonna immediately end stream after this talk. You know, it depends on how tired I am. And how much I fucking hate you. Hey, what's up? Can you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear? How about me?
Wait, it's a little quiet. Sorry, I think it's something. Yeah, cool.
Okay. You say crazy or wacky?
I'm crazy and wacky all the time. How you doing today?
I'm good. Well, I'm coming down with a cold, but other than that, I'm good.
Oh. Do you want to... I think somebody told me I'm supposed to introduce people instead of having them introduce themselves, but I'm horrible at introducing people, so... Do you want to introduce yourself for my audience? How would you like them to know you?
Host of the Yaron Brook Show, chairman of the board of the Ayn Rand Institute.
All right. So people were poking us on Twitter.
Yep.
To chat. Did you have anything in particular you want to chat about? I usually do. These are very like informal discussions for me usually, so I don't have all the general setups.
Happy to chat about whatever you want to chat about. You know, it's I can cover a lot of different topics. So, and I know you can too. So let's just see where it takes us.
Let's see where it takes us. How are you feeling? Everything's going after our first 100 days.
Well, I mean, he's a disaster. He's a disaster on every front. It's horrific. I think he's setting us up for an economic recession. He's setting us up for basically disrespect for the rule of law, disrespect for due process. I mean, in almost everything that he's done, he is moving us towards some form of catastrophe and authoritarianism. Ultimately, I don't think he'll be the authoritarian. I don't think he's smart enough. And I don't think he believes in anything, so I don't think there's anything to integrate around kind of, I'm your authoritarian, because he believes in nothing. But somebody will take advantage of the fact that he has kind of changed what's acceptable in the world.
Okay. I don't know what we're supposed to talk about. This sounds exactly like what I would say. I think I agree 100%. I feel like one of my big frustrations, especially now, people call Trump a cult for a lot of different reasons, but I think one of the most important reasons and one of the scariest reasons why I view it as very cultish is there really is no ideology. There's no coherent anything behind it. So I'm like center left to far left, depending on what you depending on how you qualify it, I guess. But like I very much believe in things like capitalism, market forces, and all of that. And the far left, kind of like unchecked, can get kind of wacky when it comes to disrespecting market forces. So it's kind of disappointing to me to see I feel like there's no conservative anything in the country right now to kind of ground any of it out. And I think, like you said, for anything that conservatives, I guess ostensibly, ever believed in, Trump seems to be abhorrent for all of those things. Whether you want to talk about economics or rule of law or authoritarianism or like literally anything, it's been pretty frustrating these past 100 days, like watching conservatives retreat from every single argument they used to make prior to Trump coming in for the second term.
Yeah, and this is the problem. The problem is the conservatives have always been an empty vessel in a sense. They've never really had a backbone. They've never had a coherent ideology. It's an ideology ultimately based on religion. And if you base an ideology on religion, it's floating and it's meaningless. It's based on faith in what, and that can change depending on who is advocating for it. So conservatives have always been weak. They've always been pathetic. What they believe, what they claim to believe in, they've never done. Right? When they've claimed to be pro free market, they've never actually gone after free markets. So, you know, we're getting kind of the logical conclusion of a long line of conservatives selling out, or more correctly, really sticking to their conservatism, when what we need is something much more radical than conservatism. So I'm not center left, as you can imagine. I'm a 100% laissez-faire capitalist, and believe in the kind of the political system that requires. And conservatives have never stood for markets, in my view. Never understood markets, never supported markets. They've used markets when it was convenient. And what Trump is doing, Trump is an empty vessel. The scary thing is, and this is where I think it's really scary long term, is that he is surrounded by ideologues who have a very scary ideology, who have an ideology of of authoritarianism, an ideology of Christian nationalism, or just nationalism, which I think is much scarier than Trump. Trump is just like shooting everywhere with no coherence. These guys know what they want, and what they want is very, very bad for all of us.
Yeah, I think in some ways it's scary, in other ways it's comforting, because I think that Trump kind of holds everybody together with kind of the culty stuff, basically because everybody worships Trump. So I look at somebody like Vance, and I think Vance is incredibly scary ideologically, but Vance is never going to replace Trump in terms of holding the party together. Like, I feel like once Trump is on his way out, I don't see yet any other kind of figure that anybody can coalesce around. It's not either of his children. It's nobody in the current administration that I'm aware of. There have always been these people who've kind of like popped up and then they're like almost immediately gone. I remember there was a brief moment in time, we've all collectively wiped it from our minds, but like people like Vivek Ramaswamy were like, could this guy be the next Trump? And then people were like, can DeSantis step in and take over from Trump? And it's just these people like come and go. Elon Musk is on his way out. So,
Sure. The challenge is that once you soften the culture up for this kind of, for these kind of people, we didn't see Trump coming. I didn't see Trump coming. I never thought he would win in 2015, 2016, early on. Only later did it seem reasonable that he would win. I didn't think, after January 6th, I thought, okay, no way, he's gone. He's just, so once the culture is ready for, and look, the authoritarianism could come from the left. I don't know. We're set up for authoritarianism. We kind of soften the culture in anticipation of it. Somebody will arise to take advantage of it. It's not J.D. Vance. I agree with you. He's he's just too, people don't like
charisma.
Yeah, he has no charisma.
He doesn't have it.
Josh Hawley's the other one who really, really scares me. Who's in a sense smarter than J.D. Vance and been around for a little longer. But it could be somebody we don't know. I mean, Obama came out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. Trump came out of nowhere. Somebody could come out of nowhere to take this, down the road. It could be Charlie Cook. Who knows who it could be, but I'm worried about kind of the mindlessness. It's not just a cult of personality, because there's a sense in which Trump follows the crowd, not the other way around. So think about the vaccines, right? One of his few achievements the first time around was the COVID vaccine. And so when he started campaigning, he mentioned it, and he was immediately booed, right, mm-hmm. by the MAGA. So he switched. He never mentions it. Now he's anti-vaccine. He points RFK. So the movement is there. The mentality is there. It's not a majority of Americans, luckily, but it's a big chunk of the population. It's a significant number of people who are pretty passionate and enthusiastic about what they believe. And then it's a question of can they find somebody to coalesce around and bring in people that maybe in the past have now voted for Trump and bring them into this big tent. I don't know. Political, short-term political prediction is I'm not very good at it. So who knows who they'll get?
Yeah, I think one of the big challenging things is like thinking of what comes after. And it sounds like really brutal, and I don't mean to sound brutal about it, but there has to be like a reckoning or some accounting for what happened. We can't, like, assuming the country survives the next 4 years, I think it would actually be a mistake to walk away from this and do nothing and pretend that the last 4 years never happened. Because one thing that you said that I think that people don't realize this all the time. There's this phrase like, do the ends justify the means? And I think sometimes what people aren't aware of is that when you do things to effect some certain outcomes, you're one of the things that you're passing these like hidden new rules that people aren't really aware of. And yeah, like you said, the environment has been radically changed now, such that if somebody else comes along and starts saying some crazy stuff, you can just say, well, the last guy did it. Like everybody's kind of more accepting of it in their mind. One of the examples that I give has to do with the whole senility argument with Biden. And regardless of whether you thought he was slow in his last debate or having issues related to senility, which I mean, there are a ton of arguments for. One thing I noticed for Trump is Trump talks like a fucking idiot so consistently that you will never, ever, ever, ever be able to call him senile ever. Like some of the answers that he gives are just hilarious, and hilarious in a very dark way. I think in relation to that Alien Enemies Act, I think somebody asked him like, oh, when you signed this to do this, and he's like, what? I don't remember signing that. Did I? And I couldn't tell if he didn't remember like invoking the law or if he didn't.
For the weekend, he was asked about due process and the Fifth Amendment. It was like, I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He would just like answer these casually, but like I mean, kind of along with what we're saying, that the environment has been prepared so much that you never really expect him to know anything about what he's talking about. Like I remember, I was curious because I looked back and I was like, when Biden was signing executive orders, what did that look like? And Biden, I looked at the first video, he would go up to a podium and he'd say, our education is important, we need to do this, and blah blah blah, and then he would sit down and he'd sign it. And for Trump, he's sitting there at a desk and he's like, oh, what's this? And then whoever's handing him the thing is like, well, you told us that you wanted to do this in your administration, so we've got an executive order. He's like, oh, well, that sounds like a good idea. And he signs it and he hands it over. And it's like, if Biden was doing this, these people would be losing their minds because he's not even writing these executive orders. Yeah.
Well, look, and this is the sense in which we've been setting ourselves up for Trump for a long time. I mean, the whole idea of executive orders, is only intensified. People have used it more and more and more. Bush was abused executive orders, Bush Jr., and then Obama did, and then Trump did more, and then Biden did more, and then Trump is now every day. There's a bunch of them. So we're now governed by an incredibly powerful executive, and Congress, of course, has passed on the responsibility of doing these things, which constitutionally it's supposed to do. And again, that's a process that's happened over decades. It's not yesterday they woke up and said, we're ignoring our responsibilities. It's decades, maybe even 100 years now. So all of this is a slow erosion in our system of government, and Trump is now taking advantage of it in spades. And the next guy is going to start from that starting point. And we become so tribal. I saw this. I thought this poll was really interesting. So they looked at polls regarding free trade and people's attitudes to free trade. So about 6 months ago, 9 months ago, about 20% of Americans said they were pro free trade, Democrats and Republicans. Right, 20% of Republicans, 20% of Democrats. Since Trump got elected, Republicans, it's dropped to like 10, 15%. Democrats have gone up to 80%. Now, have they suddenly studied economics and discovered that that free trade is a good thing, or is this now the tribal thing that they're supposed to say and be anti-tariffs? So I worry that the whole political spectrum is tribal now, and then you don't know what you're going to get because you don't know what the next exciting phenomena is going to be. Somebody that rallies the troops, and of course, the worst phenomena is somebody who can unite people on both left and right under some banner of authoritarianism. Authoritarians need the populace at least to support them at least somewhat, right? And they need a large coalition. They really get those large coalitions either through their silence or through active support. And I fear that that's where we're ultimately heading.
Yeah, I'm not. I have no idea what comes after the current administration. One thing that you mentioned about polling Democrats or Republicans, how they feel about free trade. One thing I've noticed is it's very frustrating. You have to get everything's like a proxy for something else. When you ask a person a question, you're not really asking them what they feel about a thing. You're just asking them. Usually it's like proxying like an emotional state at any given point in time. And it's funny because in some ways it's so obvious, but like in other ways, like people don't realize it. Not to come down on whatever generation of people that are upset about, housing or other things that are unaffordable. It's funny to listen sometimes, I'll listen to 18, 19, 20-year-old like college kids or right after will be talking about like, oh, it's impossible. Like it's, like we have no money and we can't afford anything and all of this. And it's like, well, yeah, you're in college. You're just graduated. Of course you have no money. Obviously, nobody has any fucking, you're 22 years old. Why would you have any money right now,
Exactly.
But everything in a particular moment in time feels a certain way. Or people will say they care about a thing, you'll say free trade. And if nobody's thinking about it, if like the economy's going well, or if they just got engaged and went on a cruise with a loved one and they went to another country, they're like, free trade sounds awesome. But if, like if COVID happens or if anything else happens and they're just like in a bad mood or something just seems like it's not working, it's like, oh, I hate free trade. That's a horrible thing. Yeah, it's frustrating. I understand normal people, ordinary citizens doing it. I get very frustrated when political commentators do it because they should know better. And seeing people, the whiplash from, well, if Trump pardons, the J6ers that didn't have due process rights, that's okay, I guess. And then Trump pardons all of them. And it's like, hello? And they're like, well, the Dems did it first. Really? Okay.
Yeah, but that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is we have a populace today that is emotional, that is unthinking. Government does so many things they can't keep track. It's part of, I think, the reasoning of why government should be a lot more limited is this idea that now it intervenes in every aspect of our lives. People get involved in politics when they shouldn't. Politics should be a minor issue in their lives, but it has to be a big one because they feel like it's intruding in their lives all the time. And yet they're ignorant. They have no clue, and they're very, very easily manipulated by emotional arguments. And that is a combination that is scary.
Yeah. What was the original Twitter thread about where somebody tagged us to chat? Do you remember what?
I think they just wanted us to chat. I don't think it was anything particular.
Oh.
They probably thought we'd chat about Ayn Rand, but we could chat about. Let's try to see if I can find.
Usually people tag me to another person because there's some topic that we have some massive disagreement on, and then because my reputation is for fighting with people. So
yeah, I mean, we probably disagree on the extent of capitalism, right, and on how much on a free market, and on how limited government should be. Mm-hmm. But I think we agree in Israel. I don't know. I think we agree in Ukraine. I don't know. I think we agree on Trump.
Well, here, I'm curious. So, I guess my general libertarian question: in a libertarian system, how do you account for? I guess for Chad, I'll call it something called an externality, things that aren't necessarily captured by market forces. So, pollution is the obvious example. What do you think is like an ideal solution for that? Is that a thing we think government can intervene, or do you think markets would solve it eventually, or what do you think? Yeah.
Sure. So a couple of things. First, I don't like the label libertarian. I'm not a libertarian.
Okay.
I don't want to be associated with some of them, and a few of them come to mind right now. So the few issues where I disagree with them so violently that I just don't want to share a big tent with them.
Wait, what do you mean by that? I'm curious.
So I'm very opposed to anarchy. I think anarchy is the equivalent of authoritarianism. I think it's a disaster. It's violence. Mm-hmm. It's legalized violence. You kind of have the authority to shoot anybody because there's no rule of law. Law is out. You have competing police force as well. I'm my own competing police force. I get to do what I want. So I think anarchy is a disaster and a repudiation of laissez-faire capitalism completely. If you look at the foreign policy of somebody like Dave Smith, I think it's just horrific. I think his views regarding Israel, Hamas, those things are just beneath contempt. Mm-hmm. So the foreign policy generally, I disagree with libertarians a lot, but it's primarily the anarchy thing, and usually the ones who have really bad foreign policy views are also anarchists. I don't think that's accidental. They tend to despise the governments that actually function relatively well, like the United States and Israel, because in a sense it's a repudiation of their thesis that all states are evil and we have to dismantle them immediately and go to a state of anarchy. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I don't like the term. I don't want to be associated with many of them. There's some that I like. Right? There's some people who call themselves libertarians who are great, who are really good economists and have are really good, but I just don't want to be part of that big tent. Externalities. So I'd say the first step to deal with externalities is to internalize as much of them as possible. And you do that by basically applying private property everywhere you can. So I think all land should be privately owned. I think the rivers should be privately owned. The ocean front should be privately owned. You want to, they've even had experiments about fisheries and property rights over fish, and it's complicated to do, but things like that solve a lot of the externality problems by, you can't dump your garbage into my backyard. You can't dump your garbage into my river. If I'm downstream of you, you can't pollute upstream. I sue you if you do. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the externality problems go away when you actually define private property correctly, and you extend it to everything that it's possible to extend it to. I think that the one area that's more difficult is air, of course, because you can't have private air. But I can say that if you pollute, and I'm breathing what you're polluting, and I can show that it is damaging. That is, I can objectively show in a court that you have caused me harm. I have recourse against you. And I think that the government has a role in monitoring those kind of lawsuits, seeing a pattern where, a certain chemical clearly has been shown in, let's say, a number of courts to be, dangerous for human life. The government can ban it because it's a violation of individual rights, right? You're causing harm to other people. So I think that's how you address pretty much all the externalities regarding clean air, clean water, things like that.
What do you do? I'm curious, if you have an area where, let's say some guy owns the land and it's just a real prime dumping land. It's good to dump stuff that'll roll onto that land. And there's there are more people against him than with him, I guess, that would stand to benefit from polluting that land. You just look at the courts as basically ways for recourse.
I think the courts are ways for recourse. You have to show damages. You have to show that there's real harm. Mm-hmm. It's not just your property value went down. That can happen for lots of reasons, but it has to be real harm. And yeah, I mean, look, if this dumping place is going to pollute the groundwater, and I own the water company, and he's going to pollute the water that I make a living off of, then clearly there's harm. I can sue him. So there are all kinds of mechanisms. And look, in the 19th century, it's kind of interesting. In the 19th century, when most of the West was private, people came out there and they built stuff, and they fenced off things for ranching or for farming or for whatever. There was a lot, for example, of law developing through the common law system in America around water rights. Who has the water rights? How you distribute them? What counts as pollution? How do we settle that? But once the government came in and regulated in everything in kind of a one-size-fit-all kind of mechanism, and for the most part took upon itself the right to water, that is the property of water, suddenly became a state thing. That law stagnated and kind of disappeared. It stopped. And what we needed is for that to continue. And I think we'd have a much better idea of how these kind of disputes, what kind of disputes arise, and how you would deal with them in a rational economy, in a true free market.
Okay, I gotcha. I understand. How do you said that you disagree with a lot of libertarians on foreign affairs? What do you view as the U.S.'s role for things like Ukraine, Russia, or Israel, Palestine?
So it's hard to take. I mean, we live in a particular world today, so I'd say that we have certain responsibilities vis-a-vis, I think, Ukraine today, because we're a member of NATO and we've made some commitments and we have treaties, and therefore, whether that would be the case in my ideal scenario, we can talk about that. But let's just talk about today for a minute. I think given that we are kind of a guarantor for the security of Europe, Russia is a clear threat to that. I think the United States should do what it can to prevent a situation where it has to place American kids in harm's way vis-a-vis Russia. And therefore, if we can relatively cheaply pay the Ukrainians to fight for us and hold the Russians back, I think we should. I think we're getting a phenomenal deal from the Ukrainians. I think the weakness of the Biden administration was that it wasn't willing to provide the right weapons and allow them to be used appropriately. I mean, this whole fear of escalation, I think, was just a sign of weakness. But if we had been willing to give Ukraine the kind of weapons they needed, I think this would be over by now. And I think Ukraine can hold back the Russians and prevent them from invading Estonia, because if they invade Estonia, America then has to put troops on the ground fighting Russia, and that would not be good. That potential for World War III, but also American kids dying for Estonia, I don't think is right. I don't think we should be fighting for Estonia. So Ukraine's a cheap method of doing it. In terms of Israel, I think the United States shares a common enemy with Israel. We won't admit it, and we've kind of evaded that fact since 9/11, or really since 1979, since the rise of the Iranian mullahs. We've evaded the fact that we're at war with jihadism, Islamic totalitarianism, radical Islam, however people want to call it. But there is a movement out there that is at war with us and wants to kill us and wants to destroy us. Israel, again, is relatively a cheap way to hold that movement at bay and to and potentially to defeat it. So it's a relatively cheap way to do it. I don't particularly like the fact that we give Israel aid. Israel is now a developed country. It's fairly wealthy. We should wean it off U.S. aid and have them buy the equipment they need. But I think we should sell them anything they want that is crucial for their defense, and recognize that Hamas is an American enemy. If they ever get rid of Israel, we're next. Hezbollah is an American enemy. Islamic Jihad, the new regime in Syria. I mean, the Islamists are out there and they want to destroy Israel, but much more important to them is ultimately the destruction of the United States, or at least causing us pain.
Okay.
Now, in an ideal world, in my ideal world, I think the United States would leave NATO. It would basically tell the Europeans, "You're rich enough to take care of yourself. We'll help you. We'll sell you weapons or whatever. But Russia's the bad guys. But you can handle Russia. You've got 3 times the GDP, 3 times the population, and 7, 8 times the GDP. I can't remember. It's some astronomical, much richer than Russia. It could be much better equipped than Russia. You can handle it." I would focus more on the Pacific, because I think China is a potential threat militarily. But the standard should be a real America First strategy, right? I hate to use a term that he uses, but a real America First. That is and here you need strategy, right? And this is what I don't think we've had since World War II. You need a strategy. What does American defense require? What does protecting the rights of Americans, the right to life and property, require? Short term and then long term. And let's act in the world in a way that protects the lives of Americans and the property of Americans. So let's figure out what the right strategy is. And what do we do vis-a-vis China? What do we do vis-a-vis Russia? And what I sense is that we shoot from the hip. We're reactive. There's no real strategy. When there's a pseudo strategy like George Bush's, it's a fantasy, like bring democracy to the Middle East, which was pure fantasy at the time, and to some extent still is. So,
what do you think? I'm just curious, from kind of like a game theory perspective. Let's say that we abandon like soft power for Europe and we just kind of like focus on the United States. Do you think there's an argument there that if Russia or China were to kind of like overtake the U.S. role in enforcing that soft power, that ends up actually being worse for us in the future? Or how do you view that?
So it depends what you mean by soft power. So, for example, I do think the United States should retain something crucial to its own interest, which is, for example, protecting the world's sea lanes and allowing for international trade. I think international trade is super crucial for the U.S. It was kind of funny to see, not funny, sad, depressing to see J.D. Vance say, "Oh, we shouldn't deal with the Houthis because Europe benefits from this trade." We do dramatically, and when Europe benefits, we do, and we have the only navy in the world that could actually take care of sea lanes. So we should not give up on naval superiority, because I think that's part of this thinking strategically about what is truly in America's interest in terms of property. In terms of, I think at the end of the day, soft power is exaggerated. What counts as hard power. What counts is the willingness to use it. I think one of the reasons the United States has failed so much in its foreign policy is because it's failed to use its hard power in a definitive way. It's used hard power in a pathetic, soft way. if we actually used our hard power once or twice and it made it clear that we were willing to use it, I think most of the crises in the world would go away because nobody would want to mess with us. We still have by far the strongest military force in the world. But everybody knows we won't use it, right? Everybody knows we're cowards in terms of using our military. So I actually think by focusing on ourselves, but by using our hard power when it's necessary, Iran, maybe there's some other circumstances, but you really using it unequivocally, I think what we do is project an image of strength that kind of tells the Chinese, oh, we should think twice about anything we want to do. And I think Russia's very weak. I don't think Russia's a threat. It's a minor threat to the Europeans. And again, they have the tools to deal with it. We can have a coalition of free countries. Whether it needs to be a coalition where the United States protects these three countries or whether it's a coalition that makes decisions together, I would replace the UN. I would close the UN and kick them all out. And I would replace it with an institution of free countries, of countries that, you could define as relatively free.
I feel like, I guess the only fear would be, so ignoring like the hard power or the soft use of hard power, like let's say, for instance, like Europe joins a customs union or something with Russia and China, and they decide that they're going to be preferential when it comes to internal trade versus external trade, and the United States like loses influence that way. We're not really, or would you advocate for military strikes if people start throwing up tariffs against us as a part of that? Because it seems like there are ways there then that we could lose, I guess, like standard of living, quality of life, whatever. We could lose influence that way, just because of an abdication, I guess, of our I guess, friendship with Europe. Yeah.
Sure, but I think if other countries want to be suicidal, they're going to be suicidal. That is, my trade policy would be unilateral zero tariffs, and anybody who wants to trade with us, great, and people who don't want to trade with us or don't. And if that means that America exports less, so be it. Luckily, we have. And of course, I think a unilateral zero tariff would actually inspire other people to join in and to actually engage with more trade with us rather than less. I think the best way for America to lead is by example. I think we've done very poorly in that. We've moved so far away from capitalism, and we keep undermining our own capitalism that we don't serve as a model for the rest of the world as I think we used to be. So I think our strongest suit is the hard power and a lead by example. If we had anything approaching a true free market in this country, we'd be so rich, everybody would want to emulate us.
What do you think, when you look at other countries, is there like a country that you think does it better, or what country do you model ourselves after? Don't say Switzerland.
Yeah, sadly, there isn't. I mean, they all have certain strengths and certain weaknesses. I don't think we're that much better than in other countries. Like people say, oh, Denmark is this ideal for the left. But Denmark's not that different than the United States. In some parameters, they're freer, and some parameters, they're less free. And they're poorer than the U.S. So, Switzerland's good on some things, really good on some things, poor on other things. Hong Kong pre-Chinese takeover was pretty cool, although it didn't exactly have any Republican or constitutional guarantees. So it was not clear that it would survive. So nobody, you could pick and choose elements from different countries, but no, there's nobody who does it better right now. I think the U.S. in some regards did it better 150 years ago, but in other respects it did it worse, right? I mean, certainly in other respects of individual rights, they did. You wouldn't want to be a woman 150 years ago. You wouldn't want to be black or other kind of ethnic minority 150 years ago. But certainly from an economic freedom perspective, we were freer. There was still a lot of controls, a lot of regulations, a lot of cronyism, but much better than today.
Okay. Trying to think. We can go down any topic. I guess here's a question. So I grew up mega conservative, and then I had my libertarian. I was libertarian for a while, and then I've kind of like drifted more to the left on social, I guess, and economic policies. You brought up something interesting earlier about how you don't want to use the libertarian label because you feel like it's been kind of like bastardized and abused. I don't want to. I never know like if people are publicly feuding or anything. Do you look favorably on people like Penn Gillette or?
I mean, I like Penn. I like a lot of what he does. I don't think he has. I don't think he has ideas that are completely crazy. I worry a little bit about that he reflects a certain moral subjectivism,
Okay.
which I think is harmful.
Okay. Okay. I was just
I don't know
curious.
if people get that or not, but generally, I think Penn Jillette on the social issues is pretty good. On the economic issues, he's got had. I once had dinner with him, and we seem pretty aligned on a lot of things.
One of the things that's very frustrating to me growing up and then like consuming a lot of content from like Penn and Teller bullshit, or I was a Ron Paul fan at the time and everything too, is it feels like back then libertarians, I speak through the lens of like vaccines a lot on this. Like I feel like if I were to go back 20 years ago and talk to a libertarian, like I would say something like, hey, how do you feel about, say, vaccine mandates? And a libertarian would say something along the lines of like, there has to be an insanely compelling reason for public health to do this. Otherwise, it's your own autonomy, and the government can't, compel you to to take a vaccine for yourself. They should never be able to do that. And then if I were to ask a libertarian, it's like, oh, do you not have any vaccines? They would say, of course I'm vaccinated. I'm not a fucking idiot. What do you mean? Obviously, I have all my vaccines. Yeah.
Yep.
Nowadays, I feel like if I were to talk to a libertarian, they would give me all those public health arguments or whatever, and then I'd be like, "Oh, okay. Well, are you vaccinated at all?" It's like, "None of my kids are vaccinated." No, of course not. I don't trust any of it at all.
Let them get the measles. What the hell?
Yeah, and it's like, Jesus, wait, what the fuck? Or what happened? Like, it feels like a lot of the libertarian label today, and I blame Glenn Beck a lot for this and the Tea Party, because I feel like somehow the Republicans kind of like captured that libertarian label, and now libertarian became synonymous with Republican conservative somehow, and then they became it's like the party of cutting the government and cutting the deficit, even though they increase it astronomically every single time.
Absolutely.
And the labeling and everything has gotten so frustrating, and I understand the frustration on that libertarian label, because I have no idea when somebody IDs that way. We're really with any political label, I have to ask like 50 questions. Where you're like, what do you actually believe in? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the libertarian movement was born that way. I think it was, again, heading in that direction, just like I think conservatism was heading in that direction. It was born. Ayn Rand called the libertarians in the 70s hippies of the right, and what she meant by that was they're more subjectivists. A lot of this is guided by emotion. They just like we talked earlier, they're driven by an emotional view. Murray Rothbard, who was at the heart of forming kind of the libertarian movement, was an anarchist. Anarchy appeals to that emotion of we want to smash stuff. We just want we just want to do our thing. We want to do whatever we feel like doing. It's not whatever is good for us or whatever reason would suggest is good for us. No, we want to do whatever we feel like doing. And Rand rejected that whole view of what libertarianism meant and stood for. And we're seeing now the combination of it. Why don't you like vaccines? Ooh, it's a conspiracy. How do you know that? Well, I feel it, right? And I think you're right. Glenn Beck was the first guy who really mainstreamed kind of conspiracy theories on Fox at the time.
And libertarian, he always described himself as a libertarian as well.
He exuded this libertarian kind of perspective, even though he never was. He even did shows on Ayn Rand. So he tried to have it always. And I take the shift. I think it's Trump. The Tea Party set up Trump. So the whole phenomena set Trump up. But once Trump and the kind of alt-right or the new right came about, it sucked all the air out from anybody who actually believed in freedom. It was much cooler to do memes, alt-right kind of memes. It suddenly became cool to be racist. It suddenly became cool to be a vaccine skeptic. All this stuff, whereas libertarianism or free markets or whatever was cool in the past for some young people, that disappeared. You saw that Bolsonaro did the same thing in Brazil. When I went to Brazil in the early 2010s, there was a huge amount of energy around free markets, like Millet. Like there was a Millet type of agitation, and they unfortunately hitched their wagon to Bolsonaro, and since then, it's just this populist right-wing crazy stuff, and all the passion around free markets is gone. It's dissipated. Mm-hmm. So it means to me that was never really there, or it was based on an emotion. It wasn't based on on real reasoning, on a real value, on a real understanding of what value that represented for you as a human being.
Yeah. How do you guys cover politics now, I guess, when you're talking? Because it feels like every day it's just unbelievable. Like there's been like 30 what would be administration ending things, happening in the past, few months. Like, Jesus.
So I have a show. It's daily. I basically tell people, don't listen to the news. It's too depressing. I'll summarize it all for you every day. I go for, I don't know, an hour and a half to 3, depending on how many questions I get. I'm just covering the news. That means a lot of prep because there are two things going on. One, there's the insanity of what Trump is doing, and then there's all the disinformation, misinformation, false stuff that's being done both on the left and on the right. So figuring out what's real. Now, luckily, Trump just says it, right? You don't have to read about what Trump said. You can find videos of him saying it. He tweets it, right, or puts it on Truth. So his sheer stupidity is right there. You don't have to get somebody else's filter to access it. That makes actually covering the news much easier.
That's the thing. It's simultaneously nice, but it's also in a way frustrating because I would always argue with these conservatives, like, you guys would support, an abdication of real guys. You guys would support. They'd be like, no, we wouldn't. We just think that they don't believe in the current interpretation of what's going on. They would always have all these excuses, and then Trump will come out and just say stuff like, I think 2020 was rigged and we should suspend the Constitution to go look for it. It's like, well, he said it. And they're like, yeah, and it's like, okay, well, at least we can talk about that now since you guys are no longer lying about it. Because, he's very blatant about, I don't actually believe in what judges say about the law. I think that's up to me to decide. And it's like, okay. Or people will talk about...
smart lawyers, you said over the weekend. I have smart lawyers.
Yeah, I've got smart lawyers.
Like, nobody needs due process or not. So, yeah, I mean, I don't find it frustrating because it's like, we're seeing what these people are really about, right? I've always criticized conservatives, since I started doing public speaking or started commenting on politics. I've been very critical of conservatives. I was very critical of the Bush administration. Rand was very critical of Reagan. And so, now we're seeing their true colors. We're seeing what they really are. And particularly these new conservatives, it's very, very important that people see how just, how they're willing to, how they don't have any principles, and how what they really want is power, and how they're willing to use that power to dictate how we think. And they complain justifiably about the left doing that for all these years, and now they're doing the same thing. So it wasn't about the compulsion, it was about what was being compelled. And again, it's stuff I've been saying for a long time, that, what's happening right now in a sense is vindication. And the more explicit it is, the more clear it is, the easier it is for me. Now, I alienate everybody, so it doesn't result in, the fact that you're right doesn't result in popularity, because the truth is incredibly alienating these days.
What do you think is the when you look at, you mentioned like the misinformation stuff, how do you even deal with that? What does that look like, that process, I guess, for you? Or because that feels like a never ending stream of just false stuff that's just said every single day. Yeah. Well,
there's a couple of things going on here. One is there's bias, and bias just exists out there, right? I mean, if I used to, when I lived in California, I used to listen to NPR a lot. And NPR is biased. It's got a leftist bias. It's clear. It's obvious, and I can adjust, right? I hear what they say. I hear the words that they're using, the concepts they're using, and I know that kind of where the bias is, or at least I think I know, right? And if I really want to know something, then I listen to their story, and then I go, oh, that doesn't sound quite right, and then I have to go dig and figure out what really happened and what's really going on. The same thing, of course, as at Fox. They fair and balanced is BS. They've always been biased. From the beginning, they were the counterpoint to CNN. What's the counterpoint? Not facts. It's our perspective. And they've only gotten worse. Today, they're just a propaganda machine for Trump. So, but the New York Times, they're biased. But it's also the only place where you can get news, right? It's not like there's an independent source out there that goes out and sends reporters around the world and delivers news. I mean, the other people just use what the reporters from the New York Times and Washington Post and other places reports, and they spin it their way. So you constantly have to adjust to what is being told, and you have to get multiple references on any story. Again, this is what makes Trump so easy, because he just says it, and then there's no interpretation needed. It's right here. But when you read a story in the Times, or when you read a story in Fox, you just have to go back it up, check. Even when they use quotes, somebody said this, and that. These days, you have to go find the video or the audio to make sure that they're quoting it right, because they all misquote, all of them. And they take it out of context. It's just part of the job now is to try to figure out what's really going on in spite of the bias. And you get better at it the more you do it, because you realize, to what extent do I have to really dig deep to figure out what the truth is? How do you do?
Agree. I agree with the one thing you said. One of the very frustrating things is, like, people will ask me for tips on, like, how do you discern true news from fake news, or how do you figure out misinformation, disinformation? And people are looking for a very quick kind of heuristic. Nope. And yeah, unfortunately, like you said, especially now with, like, all the legal stuff, it's like, if I haven't read it, I'll tell you, like, this is what I saw on Twitter, this is what I saw on whatever news website, but, like, I haven't read the original stuff, so I'm giving you there's a 20% confidence take, because yeah, it's not even that people, especially now as I've read more, you have, like, sometimes people will just lie, but it's not usually a lie. Sometimes people will quote egregiously out of context. Mm-hmm. And it's not even really egregiously out of context. Other times people they quote things, but you don't get, like, the whole understanding by just reading a particular quote. A really good example, I think, is probably that the 9-0 Supreme Court decision on related to the immigration stuff, because I guess now the Supreme Court is in the business of reviewing TRO appeals. And that's a thing where, like, you kind of have to, not only do you have to read the whole, and to be fair, this is a shorter opinion, but you have to read it all.
It was a short opinion, yeah.
Yeah, but then you also have to have kind of like a legal framework in mind for, like, well, when we say facilitate versus effectuate, like, what do we actually mean? And then one of the frustrating things, because you have to get really big into, like, civics and law, is, like, how do you explain the significance of, like, a habeas claim versus, like, an APA claim? And it's like, there's, like, so much shit. And if you don't understand any of these things, it's really... And I say don't understand any of these things, like, oh, like, everybody should, but it's a lot of stuff to dig through, and it's hard to know, because you could quote something and throw it at somebody, and if they don't have the full context, yeah, it's just so hard to understand what's actually going on.
Absolutely. I mean, I've developed certain people that I think do a good job at analyzing Supreme Court decisions, and I try to follow them and try to read what they write about these things.
Do you mind sharing the name? Are you okay with that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I like Ilya. I get the two confused. So I better get the two Ilyas out there. Ilya Somin. I like Ilya Somin at Cato.
Okay.
I think he's very good. I think the Volk conspiracy is pretty good. And they have the Reason runs. I think they have various. They don't all agree, which is good, right? So not all the legal experts agree. So you get kind of the nuance of what is the difference between them and why they disagree. Mm-hmm. So I think those are really good sources. I think the Dispatch they just kind of took over the, what's it called, Supreme Court Watch, something like that. I think it's called Supreme Court Watch.
Okay.
Again, have some good people writing that, again, don't all agree. I like it when you can go somewhere and you can find a couple of opinions and try where they develop kind of the nuances of the cases. So those I think are some good sources. But it's hard. It's hard. I mean, on any issue, what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in Gaza right now. I mean, how do you figure it out? And it's not easy.
You mentioned actually, real quick, somebody. Do you have Israeli citizenship or anything?
I do.
Okay.
I was born, raised, and served in the Israeli military.
Okay. Sorry, I just asked this because somebody typed something in chat, and then I wasn't sure, because sometimes people just say crazy stuff. Did you participate, or were you in the first Lebanon War?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay, gotcha. Do you, I'm curious, what is your perspective on the direction that Israel is taking right now?
God. I mean, I think Israel's, made a mess of this from day one. I mean, I'm pretty radical when it comes to these kind of things. I mean, my view is, and I said this, I think, October 8th, and I said this over and over again since then. they needed to completely, thoroughly defeat Hamas. And I would have taken the perspective of the hostages are dead. If we can save some of them, great. But we're not negotiating. Never negotiate with terrorists. I truly believe that. And we are going to crush them, and we're going to destroy them. There are various ways you could do that. Certainly, no aid. I think the fact no electricity. I mean, Israel provides them with internet service and with cell phone coverage. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Now, maybe they use that to gather intelligence. Maybe that's why they're providing it. But go in there and destroy them, and however many people. Sadly, innocents, however many children, however people want to spin it, die. That's what is necessary. Then that's what's necessary in order to defeat Hamas. But you have to get rid of the threat. And you have to do it thoroughly and completely and quickly. The fact that they did it for like 10 days was pathetic. I think Netanyahu is unbelievably weak. I blame him for October 7th. I think the fact that he hasn't taken personal responsibility for the fact that October 7th happened, even though it's his policies that got us there, I think is just ridiculous. Yeah.
What do you think is in your mind, what is like a stable long-term solution for Israel and Palestine, or what does that look like?
I think it's either one state or two-state solution, but it has to be after the Palestinians are defeated. So, there's a war going on between Israel and the Palestinians. It's not Israel and Hamas, it's Israel and the Palestinians. And that war needs to be won. Once the war is won and the Palestinians are basically being thoroughly defeated, then you can say to them, okay, we're going to have a 20-year transition period where you get to change your educational institutions, where you get to, slowly participate more and more in life in Israel. And in 20 years, if you guys are being basically westernized, if you've adopted kind of these liberal ideas, then we'll integrate you into society, or you can have your own state. At that point, I don't think it matters, or we can form a federation. You can imagine a number of solutions, but we're not going to deal with you as long as you hold these barbaric ideas. And this is an ideological war, and it's our ideas that have to win. It's basically what we did to Japan, right? We crushed them, and then we gave it a constitution. We wrote the constitution. We said, this is how you're going to live from now on. And if you live like this, great, we'll be best friends. And the Japanese are pretty grateful or at least friendly to us because of that. And it's what we did to Germany. We said, you can't do this again. This is out. Now, maybe after 100 years, they forget, but you've got to bring them to their knees. There's no, and that's not pleasant. It's not nice, but it has to be done.
How do you think any like future settled state, I guess, would look like? Do you think that, like, would Israel ever be in a position where they'd be willing to, turn over the rest of the West Bank, or turn over any of the settled area to any kind of like Palestinian state? Or do you think there'd be any kind of actual agreement on what the territory would look like after that?
Look, there've been proposals that the Palestinians have turned down that have basically given them almost all the West Bank, and in exchange for some of the areas where there are Jewish settlements, they've gotten parts of Israel, right? So they basically get 100% of the land they had before 1967, just in a slightly different configuration, but they get it. In 2005, Ehud Olmert, who was the prime minister at that point, made that offer to Abbas, and Abbas turned it down. So the same offer was made in 1999 to Yasser Arafat by Ehud Barak in Camp David, and he turned it down. So Israel's shown a willingness to give up the territory. Now, the more the Palestinians turn it down, and the more October 7th things like that happen, the less likely it is that Israeli society will accept that. But I think at the end of the day, if there's a real commitment for peace, and if Israel is convinced that the Palestinians have changed in a fundamental way, not just changed, say, oh, we want peace now, but literally are now, holding on to what I consider Western values, what I consider, then I think, yeah, Israel would be willing to do. Israel's always been willing to do pretty much anything for peace. People don't appreciate to what extent most Israelis, not all Israelis, most Israelis really, really want peace, are fed up with this, and would love to have a friendly and peaceful and open relationship with their Arab neighbors. I think that's always been the case. Again, there's a minority that are crazy. There's the religious nationalists, just like everywhere else, religious nationalists are nuts. But the core of the Israeli population, people forget in 2005, Israel, using force, evacuated Jews forced Jews out of their homes in the Gaza Strip, and forced them out of there in order to hand over Gaza to the Palestinians. Palestinians could have created a flourishing state in Gaza. Nothing stopped them, except their own ideas, their own philosophy, if you will.
Okay. Was there anything in particular you would want to talk about, or?
Well, there must be things that you disagree with me that we could actually have a discussion over that.
I mean, I disagree with a lot. I don't know how much you want to take into any particular thing, in terms of, from Israel Palestine to economic stuff. Is there a particular thing that you enjoy talking about the most, or?
So what would you disagree on the Israel Palestine stuff? Just curious.
What would I disagree about for the Israel Palestine? I mean, I would say that I feel like the main issue between, when I look at Israel Palestine, my issue is I don't think foreign opinion should be involved whatsoever. I think that it's set both sides up for unrealistic expectations, or rather, both sides right now I feel are wholly incentivized and are rational actors when it comes to engaging in conflict with each other. I think from the Palestinian end, they view pre-67 borders as the start. That's the starting point for discussion. And the reason why is because the international community has made them feel like they've never lost a political fight ever. So 48 doesn't matter, 56 doesn't matter, 67 doesn't matter, 70. None of these wars or anything for more Israeli territory, none of it matters. They always say that. So that's a mistake, because then if you're a Palestinian today, and I think Arafat even said to Hafez Assad, Bashar's dad, I think it was Arafat that told him, if I make a deal with the Israelis, like I'll be shot in the back the next day. Or it might have been Hafez that said that about making a deal with Israel. But
look at Sadat. I mean, it happened to Sadat, right?
Yeah, no, true. Yeah. So I think you have this issue where, and truly, if you're a Palestinian, you would be an idiot to settle for anything right now, because why? You're up against a genocidal apartheid nation that the entire world is condemning. Like, you should just wait and hold out and see what happens. So the Palestinians are incentivized to fight. And then when you look at the current admin, Netanyahu has been saved from his criminal prosecutions. He got to enjoy, what looked like to be initially a disaster on October 7th. And you'd think, Jesus, what a horrible thing. Now he can say he killed all three of the top dog, Dave Hania and Sinwar. He killed all three of these dudes. He blew up half of the fucking beepers that Hezbollah was using.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah,
good for him.
So I feel like on the Israeli side, you've got this infinite kind of expansion, the slow creeping into the West Bank. You've got your baby machines out here, past the Green Line, that are just pumping all these kids out, and slowly you're getting more and more, Jewish people, so you can start to annex more and more territory. So I think that the brakes have to be pumped on both sides here for giving everybody an incentive to keep fighting. Because it would be dumb for Israel to kind of make any negotiation because they're shoring up more and more power. It'd be dumb for the Palestinians to settle because they've got infinite international support. So I think those systems need to be removed, and then I think both sides have to look in making genuinely painful concessions that neither side is willing to make right now when it comes to actually settling for a state. So on the Israeli side, that might look like a real retreat from the West Bank of several 100,000 citizens, and I don't think Israel is in a position where they would be willing to do that. East Jerusalem is probably off the table at this point. And then on the Palestinian side, it would have to be, you have to actually put forth some kind of deal that you would be willing to accept that doesn't include an infinite right of return for what's truly the artificially exaggerated number of Palestinian refugees. It's 6 million people by now. Like, that just can't be.
Yeah, it's absurd.
Yeah,
and calling refugees is absurd at this point, right? I mean, you all refugees if you make it infinite, right? If you make the time frame infinite, I agree with much of that. Although I think that the thing I disagree with is, I just don't think that even if Israel gave all the concessions, gave it all away, that the Palestinians would abandon the goal of taking over all of Israel. I just think that, there's that saying, if Israel laid down its weapons, there'd be no Israel. If the Palestinians laid down their weapons, there would be peace. I think that's absolutely true. The Palestinians are committed to the destruction of Israel, committed to October 7th. And I think Israel does want peace. And I think their ideology, the Palestinians are being radicalized. I think the Palestinians were a lot less radical in the 70s Israel missed an opportunity in the 70s and early 80s to cut a deal. And now they're so radicalized that without thoroughly defeating them and therefore causing them to question their ideology, there's just no deal that can be cut. There's nothing you can give them that will satisfy them. Put aside the world, nothing you can give them would satisfy them that would cause them to abandon the goal of destroying Israel completely.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I view different, I think that there's a difference between Hamas and the Palestinians who live in the Gaza Strip versus the West Bank Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority, and then versus
I think Hamas wins an election right now in the West Bank.
In the West Bank, they might. In the Gaza Strip, I'm not sure. Yeah, there's issues. The problem is a lot of West Bank Palestinians aren't big fans of the Palestinian Authority, so which is, I guess, like an extension of or an evolution of because the PLO is the leading party. Yep. Yeah, so you have an issue there, but yeah, there's. Yeah, but I mean, I still do view them as separately, right? You don't get the same level of terrorism or the same level of hostility from the West Bank Palestinians as you do from the Gaza Strip, regardless of if they'd vote for Hamas or not. Now, maybe if Hamas was ruling them, maybe you would.
You would, I think.
Maybe, yeah. And then you've got like 2 million Arab Palestinians that live in Israel proper, and clearly they don't share the same views as the Gazan Palestinians.
No, and that's why I think it's possible, right? I'm not against coexistence, and the Israeli Arabs are clearly an example of that. And again, I think even they have been relatively radicalized by the success of the Islamist movement. They were even more pro-Israel 30, 40 years ago than they are today. So it's at the end of the day, I think it's an ideological battle, and it really is about liberal Western values. And over the long run, you're not going to establish peace with countries that reject those values. It's just not going to happen. And that includes Saudi Arabia. It includes the so-called Gulf states. I'm very skeptical about their long-term projection. But, if they're not moving towards Western liberalism, then I'm skeptical about how committed they are to real peace.
Maybe, but I feel like there is a gradual evolution in that direction. And I think you kind of have to let that play out.
Yeah, I don't want to force it.
Yeah, I think there is, I'm not going to sit here and say that, these Muslim majority Arab states are truly, secularized or anything. But I think there probably is a difference between, a secular Arab dictatorship versus a theocratic dictatorship. I think the government of Egypt is probably preferable to Iran. That these slow steps in this direction are probably good. And trying to force a democracy, we tried with Iraq, didn't seem to work very well. It's probably not the way to go. So,
but notice when Egypt had relatively free elections, they voted for the Muslim Brotherhood. They didn't vote for this guy. So
that's true. But the important thing is the Muslim Brotherhood. The leader who was elected, I don't remember his name, but I think he wrote a letter to Olmert, because I think one of the big fears in Israel was, peace with Egypt is over now. It's the Muslim Brotherhood. And they said, no, Egypt made this deal and we'll honor it. That was good. That was a very good thing.
Yeah, but if you follow the Muslim Brotherhood, if you study the Muslim Brotherhood, you realize that, the short run, Israel's not their biggest challenge. The short run for them, their biggest challenge was to establish a power base in Egypt and to bring Egypt back. But, they've never given up on the long-term aim. And the long-term aim is not even Egypt. The long-term aim of the Muslim Brotherhood is a caliphate. And to us, it might sound weird. Do they really want this empire? But they do. This is part of their theology. So you've got to actually look at what are they actually advocating and what do they actually want and what happens if they're actually successful. Now, granted, Saudi Arabia may be moving in a direction that is more secular. We'll see. It right now depends on one guy, and if that guy goes away, who knows what happens in Saudi Arabia. The Gulf states put on a nice facade of being very Western or very Western friendly. Again, hard to tell what happens behind closed doors over there, but and one of the advantages we in the West have is that particularly Egypt is a country that's relatively weak. It's poor, it's weak. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, have money at least, but long term, this is all about ideology, and they won't attack you if you're strong, and they will if you're weak. Yeah.
What is the saying? Walk softly but carry a big stick.
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's what the U.S. should do, and that's what the West should do.
What do you think is What do you think is a realistic trajectory for like into the midterms? Do you think that Trump is going to get, I say truly unhinged, and I hate to say that because it normalizes a lot of what's already happened, because I think we've already crossed so many thresholds of stuff that never should have happened. But yeah, what do you think is like a worst and best case scenario in terms of the next year and a half, I guess?
Well, I think a lot depends on the Democrats, and here it's problematic because they have really bad instincts, right? Um, so if the Democrats can move to the center, if they can project a kind of a non-woke, kind of responsible governance, then they could win big. I mean, really big in the House. I don't know if they can take the Senate. Senate's going to be hard, just given the where the elections are being held. But they could, if it's big enough, then they could. But they keep floating with with the far left. They keep thinking that's where their core is, and they lost because they weren't far left enough. And that's going to be a problem with them because the country is not woke. The country does not want that. The only reason Trump got elected is, I think, was because, well, Kamala was a terrible candidate, and she was associated with kind of far left positions. I think
one frustrating thing for me for a lot of Democrat leadership is they're not far left, but they won't say anything to them.
Yes.
Because you have like when you talk about like the transport thing is such a great example. There's like, I'm pretty sure like 90% of Democrats are probably like, that's probably not a great idea. And I'm pretty sure the majority of politicians are probably like, it's probably not a good idea, but nobody will ever say that, And it's like, come on, guys, this is like, can we not give them this talking point? It's so stupid that like 90% of the election is around these niche issues that have no impact on us whatsoever. Because how many people even know anything? Like Republicans are talking about getting rid of female sports before trans women came along, and now they're like the strongest NCAA women's sports defenders. And I'm like, this is the only time in your entire life you've ever been able to name one female athlete, in any of these things. Like, Jesus, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not a difficult issue. I mean, it's how many people does it affect, right? It's a relatively simple issue, but there are a lot of things like that. And then if they make AOC the face of the party, and she's definitely trying, and she's got a certain amount of charisma, so I understand why a lot of people are attracted to it. But that will not bode well for them. If they're not willing to do this, to criticize the sports, and there are a number of issues like that. It turns out that Americans are pretty left-wing when it comes to economics. And, I think way to the left when it comes to economics. Mm-hmm. They're willing to let the government do a lot of stuff economically, much more than I would want, maybe even more than you would want. But on social issues, people are pretty right. The Democrats, if they had with the right kind of positioning, could do very well, I think, in elections, but they're afraid of that positioning. They run from the social issues, or they run over the social issues. It's going to be interesting to watch. I think either if Trump backs off on a lot of the most destructive policies, or if the courts rule them unconstitutional, there's a good chance that at least these tariffs are going to be ruled unconstitutional. Now, this could take 9 months.
There's a good chance. You think so? I feel like when it comes to military shit, the Supreme Court has basically completely bent over and said, listen, the president can do whatever. As long as he utters the word national security emergency or whatever, he can basically do whatever the fuck he wants, which is incredibly irritating. But yeah,
yes.
Geez. Yeah.
I think there's a chance. I think there's a chance that they will vote against this. I think there's a chance that this ruling that the district court just overturning the use of the AEA, I think there's a chance that the Supreme Court sustains that. So I think some of the craziest stuff that he's done that is clearly unconstitutional might be the courts. I mean, the courts, I think, is the only functioning part of our government. I mean, it's the only part of our government that is functioning reasonably well.
Yeah.
Right? I think the Supreme Court's actually quite good. As compared to alternatives, and certainly better than the executive branch and Congress is completely impotent. It's completely eviscerated itself. So there is a chance that some of the worst elements of the Trump's stuff gets eliminated somehow this year by the courts, let's say, or by him turning around and saying, no, I always had a plan to lower the tariffs after I educated you all, or something.
I think on that, one thing that's very scary to me on that point, that would be so incredibly frustrating, is if you would have talked before the election about putting a 10% tariff on every single country in the world, that's an unfathomably horrible economic policy. But now that's like almost preferential, or it's like if it were to roll back everything, including China, to just 10% tariffs, like I'm worried that people in the rest of the world will be like, okay, that's not too bad. We can work. We can
live with that.
And
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
Jesus.
I agree. But it's not clear to me that he has the authority to put 10%. This is where the Supreme Court's going to have to rule, because you can't say that there's a national security emergency with every country in the world.
The EO literally said, well, we think because of their unfair trade policies, it could destabilize the U.S. economy, which would therefore lead to a national security. It was like, at that point, like Biden could have literally banned all, imports of anything that produced pollution, because we could say climate change is a national security threat, and therefore we need to ban every single import because boats use gas or something. It's like, Jesus, what? Yeah.
But of course, this is, again, it's been something that started in the, way back. What are we're right now under 63 national emergency EOs, executive orders, right? So every single president, the last 10 presidents or something, have declared some national emergency around something, and it never goes away. So this is something that's evolved, and now Trump is just taking advantage of it. And the question is, will the Supreme Court finally roll this bullshit back? Mm-hmm. I don't know, but it would be terrific. So if some of this stuff gets rolled back and the economy doesn't go into recession, and somehow we look like we're doing okay, then Republicans will probably hold the Senate, and they'll probably lose the House no matter what, but not by a landslide. But if he continues like he is in the paper today, he's tariffs on movies. I don't know if you saw that. 100% tariffs on movies if they're not made in the U.S.
Yeah.
Most movies, American movies, are not made in the U.S. Like Mission Impossible is filmed in locations all over the world, and because of the cost of unions, we make a lot of the movies in Canada and other places where they've got benefits. Mm-hmm. So if he continues like this every day with a new stupid idea for a tariff, which is the only thing he believes in, the only thing Trump believes in is tariffs. I don't think there's any other issue where he actually has a belief.
Well, because tariffs, I think about it from Trump's perspective. Also, all of the, over the past year and a half, I've done so much more reading on politics and law and everything, which was a total waste of time, because for Trump now, I just have to turn on my YouTuber brain, because I think if you analyze Trump as an influencer, it truly explains everything he does so much better than trying to understand, trying to do any kind of
political theory there.
Yeah, an ideological analysis of Trump. I don't know. Like, I don't even really like calling him like an authoritarian or fascist, because he just isn't even really. He just not isn't. He doesn't have the mind for it, right? He doesn't even have. There's an expression called "they're not even wrong," right? Like when somebody says something that's just so stupid, you're not even wrong because you haven't even asserted anything of enough factual relevance for you to even evaluate. And
that ideological analysis needs to be done on people like J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley.
But I was going to say for Trump guys on the tariffs, the reason why he likes it, and I really truly believe it's as simple as this. The happiest I've seen Trump, I think, in the past 4 years is when he was giving a speech to, there was some Republican thing. It was when he said, every country is kissing my ass. And I think it's because he did a thing, which was these insane tariffs, that when he brought that poster board out, everybody was like, wait, what am I looking at right now? What, 93% tariffs on who? On Vietnam? What? And he was so happy because it's a tariff is the thing that he can do unilaterally, truly unilaterally, not unilaterally as the United States and not unilaterally as the executive branch, but unilaterally as president. He can decide a tariff and then everybody wants to talk to him. And it's like the most attention he can ever get. And I think that's why he loves these tariffs so much. Like, you can wake up tomorrow and be like, I really want a call from Germany. Let's 30% tariff him and see who gives us a call. We were calling.
Well, now he's getting calls from Hollywood.
Yeah.
He's going to call him up. And that's like orgasmic, right? Mm-hmm. So I completely agree. He's a narcissist. Narcissists thrive on attention. They thrive on people kissing their ass, and that's what he wants. Now, tariffs goes a little deeper only because even in the 80s, he hated trade deficits, right? Trade deficits where he believed is the real evil, is the real enemy, is the real bad stuff. And I think he really has this conception of trade being zero-sum. In every trade, there's a winner and a loser. And I think that's how he ran his business. I think this is why he treated suppliers and others so horribly. People didn't want to work with him again because he really believes it's all zero sums. So I think it's just one belief in life.
Sure.
trade is zero sum and the winners and losers and everything.
Yeah, that's it's such an annoying thing. You talked about like people taking advantage of us, and it's like who is taking it? Like, nobody would look at the past 100 years of U.S. dominance in every single facet on the world stage and be like, man, everybody sure is screwing over the United States. Look at these great countries that have these huge trade surpluses, like North Korea and Iran and the United Kingdom, right? They're destroying with their economic policies right now, as opposed to the United States, who are such losers that we can literally have $37 trillion of debt that we can still fund at low interest rates and like decent inflation compared to the rest of the world, just because everybody wants to buy our debt because our economy is so strong. It's like, man, the U.S. sure has gotten screwed on that one. And it's like, Jesus, what are we even talking about right now? Yeah, it's so frustrating.
But again, this is kind of a consequence of the fact that, and this is something the left started about, before the financial crisis, but really accelerated during the financial crisis. And that is this idea that, yes, kind of on the top end number of GDP, the economy's done pretty well since the 70s. But the working class has really, really, really suffered, and their wages have stagnated, and inequality is exploding. All stuff that's been debunked. But you say it over and over and over again enough times, people start believing that they had better lives in the 70s or life was better in the 50s, when it wasn't. It's complete BS. And then the right picked it up, the same rhetoric, exactly the same rhetoric that I remember debating at post-financial crisis about how awful the economy is relative to the past.
Yeah.
The right picked it up, and now it's like everybody believes it. There's nobody who doesn't believe that the working class is now worse off today than they were in the 70s.
And you look, and I try to look numbers up for this anywhere. They're like, yeah, I remember back in the 60s and 70s when every single person had a really great union job and one man could work a job and take care of a family of 6 and send every kid to college. It's like, in what world? First of all, not everybody even went to college back then. Number one. Number two, home ownership rates were never that high in any group of people ever. Like what are we even talking about? Like I can't find it anywhere. I wasn't alive then. Maybe I'm just missing something. But yeah, it's so
home
frustrating.
I was alive then. 70s sucked. Home ownership is pretty much constant, right?
Yeah.
So.
And I finally gotten to the age, because I'm 36 now, where for the first time I saw somebody on Twitter say something like 20 years ago on minimum wage, you could live on your own. I was like, hold on. I lived in Nebraska. 20 years ago, I was making it was like $5.33 an hour at McDonald's. I could not afford an apartment on my own. I had to have a girlfriend or to share rent with. What are you talking about? Minimum wage sucked. So I'm starting to hit that age where people are hearkening back to my working teenage days. I'm like, no, this is not at all accurate. Yeah.
Yeah, none of us. I mean, home ownership is pretty stagnant throughout. The next 50 years, it's about 63%. It spikes before the financial crisis because we incentivized home ownership. It was a big campaign thing for Clinton and Bush, and therefore people bought homes they couldn't afford. So it spiked to 67, 68, and then it went right back down to its equilibrium, which is around 63, 64% of America's own homes. That hasn't changed much. Homes were smaller in the 50s, 60s, 70s than they are today. People live in much bigger homes today. They had one car. Most people didn't have AC. They didn't have dishwashers. Even lawn. I was poor when I was young, right? So I remember doing laundry by hand with my wife when we first got married.
Jeez.
Because we didn't have a washing machine, right? I don't think many people, and this is in Israel, not here, but it was, it's early 80s. So people have no clue. They have no conception of what life was like back then. And too many older people, I think this happens when you get older, romanticize the past, and young people have no clue about the past, and nobody actually looks at the data. You look at the data; it's quite obvious. The U.S. economy's done really, really well. I wish it had done better. I think it could be doing a lot better for everybody. But in poverty, we should have eliminated poverty by now, and that's doable. But if you compare it to what's possible, you would be sad. But if you compare it to other countries, we've done much better than other countries, and everybody's better off. And we should think about why and how do we expand the things that make us rich and shrink the things that don't, right? That hurt us.
Yeah, I say that all the time. It's good to have perspective because things can always be better, but some things have obviously worked. So how do we capitalize on what works, and how do we minimize the things that don't work? But people, just want to throw everything out sometimes. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, and it's interesting that the both right and left have learned that if you lie, and if you say it over and over and over and over again, it somehow, and maybe this goes back to your thing about influences, it gets embedded in the culture and it becomes truth. And, some of us can come out and say, here's the statistic, here's the graph, here's the numbers. And it doesn't resonate. It doesn't impact at all.
Yeah, you feel like there are some things that there are topics that even with my own, I just don't like to trust, or not trust. I don't like to even touch these topics because I know it gets people so riled up. Like home ownership rates for young people are about what they were for the people the same age category. When you talk about Gen X or millennials or with the baby boomers, but like that statistic feels impossible and it feels horrible to talk about because it's not the prevailing narrative online, or the idea that today, again, nobody likes to talk about it, but like, man. First of all, most people live in a home that is owned, and homeowners have enjoyed a pretty big transfer of wealth in the form of really low interest rates. Around the mortgage crisis and everything else.
Tax deductibility of their mortgage.
Well, that and the fact that the interest rates because so many people refinanced in this insanely low interest rate environment, and there are like more people with interest rates below 3% right now on the homes that they're in than there have ever been in U.S. history. But one problem you run into is that when homes start to get more expensive, you immediately see the losers, right? Well, if I want to buy a house, well, fuck me. Or if I want to go rent someplace, it's expensive. But it's harder to see the winners because if you're in a home and the value of that home is massively appreciated, it's not like you're necessarily capitalizing on it. You're not selling it right now. You're not reverse mortgaging. You're not doing some, weird whatever deal. And so all of these homeowners that are accruing more and more wealth in the form of like their home appreciation and value and all of that don't really see the wins as much. And then everybody kind of complains and it's like, yeah, but whatever, yeah.
And of course, that manifests itself in those homeowners having this strong incentive not to have more homes built, right? And this is part of the housing crisis we have.
Yeah.
That if I'm sitting on a huge capital gain on my home, I don't want to lose that. And if prices are going to come down if more homes are built. So I'm going to lobby and do whatever I can to prevent more housing being built. So
people don't see there's so much contrary pressure when it comes to home prices, and people will repeat these things as truisms like, we need to make housing more affordable. You understand that when you say you need to make housing more affordable, what you're also saying is you need to depreciate the value of the most important wealth asset that most Americans own, because there is no way to make just some houses more affordable, but keep everybody else's housing prices like high. That can't happen. That can't be the same thing, right? And yeah, nobody's even prepared to have that conversation because homeowners are also your strongest voter base. I live in Miami right now in an apartment. I'm nowhere near as tied to this community as somebody that probably has a house here, and they're going to want to vote to maintain their property value way more than I care about it. Yeah.
Absolutely, and the whole idea of a house as an investable asset is a perversion. House should be a consumable, right? You should buy it. It should depreciate. It should go down in value, or stay flat.
People say this thing where like when you rent, you're just setting your money on fire. It's like, no, you're not. You're getting a place to live. What are you talking about? I agree with that 100%. Yeah.
But it's so hard to explain this to people and get people to actually see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then at the same time, a lot of those same Americans are like, I want to live like Europeans, and we need to be like Europe. And it's like, in Europe, like if you go to like a lot of these countries, they don't expect to own homes until they're like retired, right? Nobody, growing up in all of these countries, like I need to have a house with a white picket fence. Like you're not getting that anywhere in any major city in Europe.
And if you go to a European home, they're tiny, they're really, really small. Because it have something like double the size, and you want to ride a bicycle in Copenhagen in the snow. Because they do, because they don't own cars. People again romanticize what's going on in these countries when it's
or they look at things that are rightfully good in those countries, but then they don't have any idea of what they have here that's not like that in those other. They don't understand the sacrifices they'd have to make and everything. Yeah.
There are trade-offs. Whatever's good's there's a cost to it, and are you willing to bear that cost?
Yeah.
So define to me what your center left, what that means. I'm curious.
What does center left mean? I like to start by just defining everything as what it actually is, and then I'll design economic policy from there. So I think that markets are real. I think the market forces are strong and undeniable. I think that sometimes it's good to mess with market forces, but when you're going to mess with them, you have to understand the external impacts that they're going to cause. But then also just to recognize like what every actor's place is, and to remove a lot of the normativity from economic analysis. So for example, like if I talk about a labor union, like a lot of people have this idea of, you know, are labor unions good or are they bad? Labor unions exist for one thing and one thing only, and that's just to represent like a shared employee interest. Sometimes it can be good. I personally think that capital has a lot of power right now in the United States. My God, you can own capital and make so much money off of it. So I think that there are good reasons why labor unions would exist to help employees collectively bargain. However, labor unions that exist are only there to represent the employee. They don't represent societal good. They don't represent like environmental policy, right? You've got the AFL-CIO that, you know, advocates against green energy and stuff all the time because they're protecting fossil fuel workers, which is fine, but just recognize that like everybody has their place. So looking at like what everybody advocates for and what they represent and the incentives that they have, and then kind of like trying to design economic policy from there. So like I'm generally in favor of, you know, like a lot of redistributive policies when it comes to wealth. I don't think that charitable organizations or churches take care of that too much. You know, like I'm generally a fan of government regulation around things that I think are hard to capture in markets, like things related to pollution and stuff like that. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, we can get into the whatever on any particular thing, but I'm a fan of having, you know, different areas in a city for like industry and power generation versus I do like mixed use zoning when it comes to like residential and commercial stuff, but like power plants probably shouldn't be in the middle of neighborhoods.
That happens anyway, right? Houston, it has no zoning, has the power plants are not next to residential, so it happens naturally. You don't have to plan for that.
Maybe, sure. I don't go to Houston.
I think both sides want it. It's less of a hassle for the industry, and of course residential neighborhoods don't want power plants in their neighborhood.
Probably maybe my most radical, I haven't thought this one completely through, but my most radical far left take, or I guess when it comes, I don't know if there's even count as far left takes. I really don't like I don't like how horizontal and vertical a lot of companies have become. I think there almost should be either a big breakup or a total. My most extreme take was I don't think a business should ever be able to acquire another business, because I feel like there's a very cancerous environment right now, especially in tech, where the goal isn't to build and run businesses anymore. The goal is to just build a business large enough that you can sell it to another huge business like Amazon or Google. And I feel like that's a very cancerous environment for competition and everything else. Obviously, the consumer benefits to some extent with some level of integration, but there's also the downside that now you're kind of trapped in some of these areas where you have no say, because you have to, if you're on the Google ecosystem or the Apple ecosystem, you're locked in and it's hard to switch. So
yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of perversions in the market today in terms of size, most of which are caused by regulations and all kinds of we prevent markets from working properly. So, we got massive conglomerates in the 60s and 70s. I mean, much bigger than what we have today. Primarily horizontal integration, primarily big diversified conglomerates. And they were disasters. One of the reasons why the 70s economy was so weak. And then in the 1980s, we had capital come in and break those companies up and kind of make them much more competitive. The economy of the 90s was primarily a consequence of the fact that we broke up the big conglomerates in the 1980s. That's why we thrived in the 90s. But at the same time, politics intervened, and what you got is regulations that make hostile takeovers almost impossible today in the United States. You got all kinds of regulations that prevent. Call them corporate raiders coming in and actually accumulating shares without paying a huge premium on those shares. So all kinds of laws that require you to make announcements and to make public everything that you want to do. In a marketplace, I think if you actually had a true marketplace, I don't know whether we'd probably have less horizontal integration. Horizontal integration never makes any sense. And I think we'd probably have, it's hard to tell how much vertical integration, but I think we'd find a much better equilibrium, because it would be guided by market forces, not by central planners trying to figure this out through antitrust, or by managers who are shielded from owners and therefore doing things that are not in the owner's best interests, which is what happened in the 60s and 70s. You had managers basically growing companies because, I mean, if I'm a CEO, I want to run a diversified company, because the possibility of me losing a lot of money and losing my job is very low if the company is diversified. But as an owner, I don't want you diversifying because it's much cheaper for me to diversify as an owner than for you to diversify through acquisition. So the incentives are all misaligned, but they're all misaligned because of regulations.
Okay. It's one of the difficult things for, I guess, for arguing against a libertarian or a lot of other alternative economic counterfactuals is I don't have anything I can point to, because I can imagine a world where, and I'm sure you can too, where if you start to remove a lot of the government regulation, there are other ways that problematic systems could emerge, but without being able to analyze that system or look at it, I have to use my messy real world to argue against your utopian counterfactuals, so yeah, but I mean, like, obviously there are definitely ways that the government regulation can get in the way and then rent seeking and all that happens. So yeah, I guess it would depend on the regulation, but
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to take, like, I mean, one of the things that frustrates me a lot of times is I get, look at this phenomena today in the world, capitalism doesn't work. And I'm like, is the phenomena you're pointing at a failure of capitalism or a failure of the particular structures that we have right now in the kind of mixed economy that we have today of some freedom and a lot of controls and a lot of regulations and a lot of distribution?
Sure. Do you think, who is your, when you look at your, I guess, like your current audience, are most of them like libertarian? Are most of them conservative, liberal? Do you think it's like a mix of everybody, or?
I mean, I think most of them are Ayn Rand fans of one way or another. I think I've convinced most of them not to label themselves libertarians.
Okay. What do you call yourself? If not, I
call myself a capitalist, a laissez-faire capitalism. So I'm an advocate for laissez-faire capitalism, a radical for capitalism, if you will, or free markets, or however. It depends on the audience. But I stay away from the libertarian label. So I find it's people like that, and then the people who kind of are trying me out, if you will. They either come from the conservatives. I've been told I've converted some Trumpists into anti-Trumpists over the years, but a lot of them come, I think, from the kind of center left, rational, reason-based, and then my job is to convince them to continue that application of reason to issues of morality, life, and economics. Because if you center left, not everybody, but if you center left, you typically claim to be an advocate for reason and science, and I'm claiming that my philosophy is basically based on reason. So if I do my job, I should be able to convince at least a certain portion of those people arguing from a leftist perspective that they're wrong on those issues, right? Okay. They need to just be more consistent in the application of reason.
Sure.
And if you are, then I think the conclusion is laissez-faire capitalism. I think in morality, the conclusion is an egoistic morality, a rational, long-term, self-interested morality.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Well, damn. Is there anything else in particular you want to get into, or?
Any of those topics I'm fine with, but it's up, your show. Who do you think, besides you, I guess is the best representation, I guess, for your kind of ideology right now? I think we both agreed your people like Dave Smith are probably not great representations of anything. Do you think there's anybody out there that does it well, or? I mean, I think the Ayn Rand Institute as an organization does it well, and they put out a lot of content and a lot of material. So I think the Institute itself does well. And the intellectuals at the Institute all do a good job, although, it's they, as individuals, they have very small followings at this point. Part of my job is to help them get to the point where they can be real influencers rather than just, advocate for ideas that few people listen to. So I think it's the Institute, and then on particular topics, there are people out there who are good, on who I might not disagree with on other on philosophy or other issues, on trade and tariffs. Scott Lincecum from Cato is excellent. I just interviewed Phil Magnus from the Independent Institute, who's really good on the history of tariffs and how they were bad in the 19th century. It's not that they were good back then and now they're bad. That they've been bad consistently, and all of that. He's done the research. I think he did his dissertation on that. So there's a bunch of people on narrow issues that, as I said, the people in law that I follow, and then on narrow issues. But in terms of representing the philosophy, I think it's the Institute, me, and maybe there's a handful of people on Twitter, but none of them have a large audience right now. We don't have a massive audience.
Okay.
That's the reality of it, sadly.
Do you view people like Rand Paul as doing anything to move people in like your direction at all, or do you view these people as not really anything related at all to?
I mean, I thought Rand sold his soul to Trump in the first term. He's a little better now. He's at least standing up against tariffs. I think that so obviously goes against is that he can't help himself. He's terrible in foreign policy. He's terrible in religion. And religion is a big deal. I think religion is, to a large extent, what hampers our ability to be to prosper. I think it infects the left, because I think the left philosophically has done a lot just to it just basically secularized morality. So it basically took the Christian morality and secularized it, but didn't and challenges maybe the epistemology and metaphysics, but not much more. And the right, of course, is very religious. I think one of the big barriers out there in the world to a more reason-based world is religion, and I think a lot of people on the left are influenced by religion without even knowing it, but they are. And the tribalism is very religious, ultimately. I mean, tribalism, what is religious? Religion teaches you to not think for yourself, to follow orders, right? Abraham's told, kill your eldest son. He's a hero because he's willing to do that. Not ask questions, just do it. And I think that's the kind of mentality that religion inculcates. And I think tribalism is the consequence of that. So the more religious we become, or the more influence religion has in a culture, the more tribal we become.
Do you think that people need some kind of thing like that? Like, do we have like a hole in our brains that needs to be filled by some type of religious thought? Because I feel that sometimes.
We need philosophy. We need ideas. We need morality. We definitely need morality. We need a moral code. So religion is a primitive form of philosophy. Religion is what they filled in when philosophy was too hard, or before philosophy, right? Philosophy is relatively new in human history. Religion predates philosophy. It's a huge achievement that the Greeks start asking questions and don't just rely on revelation to answer them, right? That they actually look into the world and try to discover truth. That's a huge achievement. And human beings revert back to the lazy. The lazy is, yeah, I believe that because I've been told. I believe that because it's written in an ancient book. I believe that just because I feel like it. That's the lazy solution. Religion is the lazy way to do it. But we need answers to questions, right? Why are we here? What's the purpose of life? What's good and what's evil? How should we live? What kind of life should we pursue? Those are really, really important questions that we really need to answer. And religion gives us answers. They're just lousy answers, and they're answers that are non-rational. That is, they've been derived from some kind of revelation or some kind of book that was written a long time ago. And what we really need is philosophical answers to those. We need people to really think it through, use reason, discover what is good for human beings and what is not, and guide us, provide us with moral guidance. That's the role, should be the role of intellectuals, is provide moral guidance and provide us intellectual guidance. And I think the intellectuals, since the Enlightenment, have defaulted on that. I think the last good ones as a group, were the Enlightenment. They elevated reason, they elevated individualism, they elevated, political liberty. And I think we've descended from there because there was immediate backlash. Religion didn't want to give up that easily. And what the secular philosophers did is to a large extent, they secularized religion. They secularized Christianity. I mean, Kant even says that's his goal to save faith from reason, and then he does it in a secular way. But the end result is, I think, ultimately faith, so the whole German Romantic philosophical schools are undermining reason, undermining individualism, and I think we're living the bad stuff in the world today as a consequence of all that. The good stuff is us holding on by our fingernails to the Enlightenment, right? I mean, we've got a battle going on between Enlightenment ideas and post-Enlightenment and pre-Enlightenment ideas, and that's a battle. And when Enlightenment wins, we thrive, and when these other ideas, the reactionary ideas of pre-Enlightenment, when we descend. And we're culturally, certainly in a descending moment right now. And then the question is, can the Enlightenment claw back?
Yeah, one of the things I bring up a lot is I feel like you, especially when it comes to things like liberalism and democracy, these are things you kind of have to actively defend. Otherwise, people take them for granted, and then very quickly they abandon those things and look for other kind of concepts.
And democracy is tricky because it depends what you mean by democracy, right? So again, defining our terms. Democracy is a very dangerous thing when it's a majority rule, when we really have it as a majority rule. And I think here the founders were geniuses in designing a political system that tried to shield us from majority rule, and shielding us through a constitution with a Bill of Rights. These things cannot be changed just based on a majority, just based on majority rule, and by making government really hard to govern, right? So you've got two houses. They can disagree, and they do constantly. Then you've got an executive who can veto what they do. Then you've got a Supreme Court that can regulate what these guys do based on the Constitution. So they made it hard to govern on purpose because they didn't want majority rule, because they knew the dangers that were involved in majority rule. So even a concept like democracy, what do we mean by it? If we mean Athenian democracy, pure democracy, we vote on everything. You're too young to remember Ross Perot when he ran. He wanted every household to have these buttons at home. And we would vote, literally vote on every bill that came up in Congress. There would be a green and a red button in every. That is insane, right? That we have representatives for that. That's why, that's why we have a republic. And so too many people don't define what they mean by democracy. Some democracy is very dangerous. We find ways to rein the violation of individual rights that can happen when a majority dominates a minority, and the smallest minority is the individual. So we have individual rights to protect the individual from the majority.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I guess when I say democracy, I'm just broadly speaking, just the establishment or a system and the way that works. But yeah, I agree. It's important.
These are the kind of definitions that are important in the end.
Yeah.
And that's what needs to be defended. And I agree with you completely. You don't defend them. And, what was it Franklin said, what did you guys give us when it came out of the Constitutional Convention? He said a republic if you can keep it, right? And keeping it is hard. And we're seeing it right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. Okay, well, hey, if there is ever like a particular issue, sometimes if like audiences will bug people to chat, if there's a particular thing you ever want to chat about in the future, or
great,
if you want to have me on, just let me know. Otherwise, where can people find you at?
Yaron Brook Show, Yaron Brook on Twitter, Yaron Brook Show on YouTube, and check out aynrand.org, AYNRAND.org.
Cool.
And everybody should read Found and Atlas Shrugged. I don't know if you've read those books. But
I've read Anthem and I've read Atlas Shrugged, but it was a long time ago. I was in high school, so yeah.
I'd be curious to see what you thought of it today.
Maybe, yeah. The issue that I run into without diving into things is, and a little hypocritical because this is our first talk, so we didn't dive a ton into it, but I get very irritated sometimes because there's so much. One thing I've totally abandoned is like conceptual talks with people generally. Like I have to ground everything out in an example. So usually if I try to give a thing, I'll try to give an example of the thing because there's so much stuff that just gets so wildly abused conceptually. You brought up a thing, my internal morality, I think was probably heavily influenced by, I'll say, I guess, objectivist thought or whatever. My internal moral system still kind of worked that way, but people just don't ever follow it to what I would see as kind of like their rational ends. So my personal morality is actually really heavily centered on, you brought up the term earlier, the concept of like, I think Ayn Rand called, I think it was enlightened self-interest.
She called it rational long-term self-interest.
Okay, rational long-term self-interest. Okay. I've heard the term enlightened self-interest as well, but like I'm a very self-interested person, but then people like stop there, and it's like, well, hold on. Like self-interest can mean a lot more than just I'm trying to fuck everybody over my entire life so that I get the most. Like, well, that's
quite the contrary.
Yeah,
I'd argue that fucking everybody over is not in your self-interest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's funny because even in like the red pill world where they talk about like alpha males and all these things, like these are some of the most like pro-social animals ever because having alliances and having like friends and being pro-social and having other people looking up to you and working with you is like it's incredibly beneficial. Like humans are cooperative and collaborative species, right? Nobody is an island. So but all right. Well, hey. yeah, I really appreciate the conversation. And again,
Yeah,
well, I'm
good
sure we'll
talking
chat
to you.
sometime in the future, and hopefully people will check you
fun.
out. Yeah, thanks a lot. I
Good.
appreciate the talk.
Thanks, dude.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. I love you guys. I'm so fucking tired. I'm gonna take a nap. I'll be back later, I promise. Don't die. Why every time I have like multiple Chrome windows open, it lags me like crazy. Sorry, I didn't have YouTube chat or Kick chat open the entire time. It's so fucking annoying. I hate Chrome. Also, you guys are all banned. Fuck me. Okay. Or maybe it was Zoom and Chrome. Okay. I love you guys. I'll be back maybe in a few hours. Stay safe, be careful, don't die. Oh, there's probably like a lot of individual things I would maybe if I were this guy, but I don't feel like diving into like policy debate right now or anything like that. So, yeah, I love you guys. Be careful. I'll be back later. Don't die. It can be DGG out the closet. No, it was Zoom plus Chrome and OBS, so I'll play nice together. Be careful.